In November 1990, a bulldozer in South Jerusalem broke through the roof of a cave that had been sealed for 2,000 years. Inside were 12 stone boxes. One of them was carved with a name, Yehoseph bar Caiaphas, Joseph, son of Caiaphas, the high priest who condemned Jesus of Nazareth to death. We are looking at his bones. 6 men ran that trial. Within 9 years, not one of them still held the power he had that morning. 2 of them left their names carved in stone. 2 of them vanished so completely that history never recorded their names at all. This is what happened to every single one of them. The trial happened in a single night and a single morning, somewhere between the year 30 and the year 33. The calendar is still argued over. The men in that courtyard were not a mob. They were the government. A Roman prefect appointed by the Emperor Tiberius, a high priest with 18 years in office. The man who had held that office before him and never truly let it go. A tetrarch who ruled a quarter of his father's kingdom, a condemned insurgent sitting in a cell, and a Roman soldier whose job that week was to nail men to wood. Every one of them had power that morning. By the year 39, the prefect had been recalled and stripped of his post. The high priest had been removed by the same official on the same journey. The tetrarch was in exile in Gaul. And the 2 men at the bottom of the story, the prisoner and the soldier, walk out of the record and never come back. 9 years, that is the entire span. We are going to take them one at a time, in the order the evidence allows, starting with the only one whose bones we can still point to. Start with the number. 18 years. Rome appointed the high priest of Israel, and Rome removed him whenever it liked. Between the annexation of Judea and the day Joseph Caiaphas took the office, the high priesthood changed hands 4 times in 12 years. Men lasted a year, 2 years. One of them lasted less than 12 months. Caiaphas lasted 18. That is not devotion. That is a working relationship. Whatever else Caiaphas was, he was a man the Roman government found useful for 18 consecutive years. That tells you exactly what kind of operator he was long before he ever laid eyes on a preacher from Nazareth. He was also, according to the Gospel of John, the son-in-law of the previous high priest. He did not arrive at that office. He married into it. His Jerusalem was not a religious city under a religious government. It was an occupied capital where the temple leadership survived by keeping the province quiet. The high priest's vestments were kept under Roman guard for most of the year and released for festivals. That is the arrangement. That is the job. And the most dangerous week of the year was Passover. The population of Jerusalem multiplied. Pilgrims poured in from across the empire. The Roman garrison moved up from Caesarea to the Antonia fortress and watched the temple courts from above. Every year the same calculation: get through the feast without a riot. Into that week walks a Galilean with a following, who overturns tables in the temple and is greeted by crowds quoting a psalm about a king. The Gospel of John gives us Caiaphas's reasoning in a single sentence, and it is the coldest line in the entire trial. It is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not. Read it again. That is not religious outrage. That is a risk calculation. Caiaphas had seen how Rome answered movements like this. He knew what a legion did to a city that could not control itself. He had 18 years of evidence that his method worked. The trial itself was fast. It was at night, and by the standards recorded in later Jewish law, it should not have happened at all. Capital cases were not to be heard at night. They were not to be concluded on the same day as the verdict. They were not to be held on the eve of a festival. All 3 rules are broken in a few hours. Whether those rules were already binding in the year 30 is genuinely debated by historians. What is not debated is the speed. Whatever happened in that house, it was designed to be finished before the city woke up. And then he falls. In the year 36, Vitellius, the Roman legate of Syria, comes down to Jerusalem for Passover. He removes Caiaphas from the high priesthood and installs Jonathan, a son of Annas, in his place. Josephus records it in one sentence, without explanation. 18 years ended in a line. And then, 1954 years later, a bulldozer finds him. The cave was in a forest on the southern edge of Jerusalem. Construction crews were cutting a road. The roof gave way. Inside were 12 ossuaries, limestone boxes used for a second burial, a year after death, once the flesh was gone and only bones remained. One of them was decorated far more elaborately than the rest. 2 rosettes carved into the side, and on it, scratched twice, the name Yehoseph bar Caiaphas. Inside were the bones of 6 people. One of them was a man who died at around 60 years old. Now, the honest part. Some scholars still argue whether this is the Caiaphas of the Gospels or another man of the same family name. The spelling has been debated, and the family may have had more than one prominent member. What is not argued is the inscription. It is there. It is in a museum in Jerusalem. You can go and read it. Of the 6 men in this story, he is the only one we can still stand in front of. If you want the rest of them, and the 2 that history loses completely, stay with me. This channel exists to finish the stories Scripture leaves open. The soldiers who arrested Jesus did not take him to the high priest. They took him somewhere else first. The Gospel of John records it plainly. They bound him and led him away to Annas first, for he was father-in-law to Caiaphas. Stop on that. The man was arrested by temple authority, on temple orders, during the most controlled week of the year. And the first place they take him is to a private house, to a man who held no office. Annas had been high priest from the year 6 to the year 15. He was appointed by Quirinius, the Roman governor of Syria, in the first year of direct Roman rule. 9 years later, a different Roman official, Valerius Gratus, removed him. But under Jewish law, the priesthood was for life. So to Jerusalem, Annas never stopped being high priest. To Rome, he was a private citizen with no standing. He spent the next 30 years living in the gap between those 2 facts. 5 of his sons held the high priesthood after him: Eleazar, Jonathan, Theophilus, Matthias, Ananus. And between the sons, his son-in-law Caiaphas held it for 18 years. Josephus records the whole sequence without comment, the way you would record a dynasty. He notes only that Annas was considered one of the most fortunate men of his time, because he saw 5 sons hold the highest office in the nation. That is the machine Jesus was brought to first. The Talmud is less neutral than Josephus. It preserves a cry against the priestly houses of that era and against Annas by name. Woe is me because of the house of Hanin. Woe is me because of their whisperings. Whispering. Of all the words that could have survived about this family, that is the one that did. Not cruelty, not corruption. The sense that decisions were made somewhere you could not see by someone who was not officially in the room. Which is exactly what happens on the night of the trial. John gives us the scene in Annas' house. There is no formal charge. There is no counsel. Annas questions him about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answers that he has spoken openly in the synagogue and the temple, and asks why he is being questioned in private at all. "Ask the people who heard me," he says. An officer standing there strikes him across the face. And then Annas sends him, still bound, to Caiaphas. That is the entire episode. A man with no legal authority receives a prisoner before anyone else, asks his own questions, and passes him on. No gospel explains why. No gospel needs to. Everyone reading it in the 1st century understood who actually ran that priesthood. Annas himself dies out of frame. No date, no scene, no record at all. He simply stops being mentioned. But his house does not end quietly. In the year 68, in the middle of the revolt against Rome, his son Ananus, the last of the five, is the leading figure trying to hold Jerusalem together. The zealots turn on him. They kill him inside the city and throw his body over the wall, unburied, which for a former high priest is the deepest insult available. Josephus, who was there and who admired the man, calls his death the beginning of the destruction of the city. 2 generations of quiet control, and it ends in a street. Jesus spoke to Pilate, he spoke to Caiaphas, he spoke to the crowd, to the man dying beside him, and to the soldiers who put him there. He never said one word to Herod Antipas. Luke is the only gospel that records the meeting, and he records it as a humiliation. Pilate is looking for a way out. He learns that the prisoner is a Galilean, realizes Galilee is not his jurisdiction, and finds out that the tetrarch of Galilee happens to be in Jerusalem for the feast. So he sends the problem across the city. Luke says Antipas was exceeding glad. He had wanted to see Jesus for a long time. He had heard the stories. He was hoping to see a miracle. He questioned him in many words, and Jesus answered him nothing. Not a refusal, not a rebuke, nothing at all. Antipas is the only person in the 4 Gospels who asks Jesus a direct question and is given silence as the answer. Understand who this silence was aimed at. Herod Antipas was the son of Herod the Great. When his father died, the kingdom was divided, and Antipas received Galilee and Perea with the title of tetrarch, literally, ruler of a quarter. He held it for 43 years, which makes him one of the longest reigning rulers in the entire region. He built a capital city on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee and named it Tiberius, after the emperor. He built it on top of a burial ground, which meant observant Jews would not live there, and he had to populate it with foreigners, freed slaves and the poor. That detail tells you everything about how he governed. He wanted a Roman city more than he wanted his own people in it, and he had already executed a prophet. John the Baptist had condemned his marriage to Herodias, who had previously been married to his own brother. Herodias wanted John dead. Antipas, according to the Gospels, was afraid of him and knew he was a righteous man, and kept him alive in prison until a dinner, a dance, and a promise made in front of guests he could not back down in front of. Josephus tells the same execution differently and more plainly. He says Antipas killed John because the crowds were so moved by him that the tetrarch feared a rebellion and decided to strike first. Both accounts describe the same kind of man, someone who kills out of fear of what other people will think of him. So when Jesus is brought into his hall in chains, this is a ruler who has already learned that a prophet can be silenced. He asks his questions. He gets nothing, and Luke says he and his soldiers mocked him, dressed him in a bright robe, and sent him back to Pilate. Luke adds one strange, quiet line at the end of it. That same day, Pilate and Herod became friends, for before they had been at enmity between themselves, 2 men bonding over a prisoner neither of them wanted. Antipas falls 3 years later, and it is ambition that does it. His nephew Agrippa, a man who had spent years in debt and disgrace in Rome, is suddenly handed the title of king by the new emperor Caligula. Herodias cannot stand it. Her brother now outranks her husband. She pushes Antipas to sail to Rome and demand the same title. Agrippa's letters get there first. The charge is that Antipas has been stockpiling arms. Enough, the accusation says, for 70,000 men. Antipas is asked about the weapons. He cannot deny that the armories exist. Caligula strips him of his tetrarchy, his money, and his territory, and exiles him to Gaul in the year 39. 43 years of rule ended in a single hearing. Herodias is offered a pardon because she is Agrippa's sister, and the emperor is willing to spare her. She refuses it and goes into exile with him. It is the only moment in her entire appearance in history where the record makes her sympathetic. 3 men down, removed, ended, exiled, but none of them signed the order. 1 man did. And he is the only one of the 6 whose name was cut into stone by the Roman government itself. A block that sat buried in a theatre on the coast for 19 centuries until an Italian archaeologist turned it over in 1961. For 1800 years, the only evidence that Pontius Pilate existed was the Gospels, a few passages in Josephus, one line in Tacitus, and a furious letter from Philo of Alexandria, who described him as inflexible, merciless, and obstinate. Critics used that, a Roman governor of an entire province, and not one Roman document with his name on it. Then, in June of 1961, an Italian team excavating the theatre at Caesarea Maritima lifted a limestone block that had been reused as a step. Someone, centuries after Pilate, had cut it down and turned the inscribed face inward. The inscription is damaged, but 2 things survive clearly. The name Pontius Pilate, and his title, prefect of Judea, not procurator, which is the title Tacitus gives him writing 80 years later. Prefect, a military rank. The Gospels had the title right, the Roman historian had it wrong, and that changes how you read everything he does. A prefect was a soldier holding a province with force. Pilate arrived in the year 26, and Josephus records his first act as bringing the army's standards into Jerusalem by night, standards carrying the emperor's image, which the law forbade inside the city. The population marched to Caesarea and lay down outside his residence for 5 days. On the 6th, he surrounded them with troops and threatened to kill them all. They bared their necks and told him to go ahead. He backed down. He removed the standards. That is the pattern with Pilate, over and over. He pushes hard, he meets an immovable crowd, and he retreats. He took money from the temple treasury to build an aqueduct and put soldiers in plain clothes among the protesters with clubs. Philo describes executions without trial and a governor who feared his own subjects reporting him to Rome. Now read the trial again. A prefect who has already been reported to the emperor once. A crowd he cannot control in the most dangerous week of the year, and a delegation telling him that if he releases this man, he is no friend of Caesar. The Gospels record him trying repeatedly to get out of it. That is not a literary flourish. That is a man who knows exactly how thin the ice is under him. He gives them what they want, and 10 years after arriving, he does the same thing, one time too many. A crowd of Samaritans gathers at the foot of Mount Gerizim, following a man who claims he can show them sacred vessels buried on the mountain by Moses. They come armed, but it is a pilgrimage, not an army. Pilate blocks the road with cavalry and infantry. There is a slaughter. Afterwards, he executes the leaders. And then the Samaritans do something nobody expects. They do not revolt. They file a formal complaint with Vitellius, the Roman legate of Syria. Vitellius removes Pilate from office, sends a replacement, and orders him to Rome to explain himself to the emperor in person. Pilate never gets that hearing. Tiberius dies in March of the year 37, while Pilate is still traveling, and there the record stops. Completely. Everything you have ever heard about how Pilate died comes from later centuries. Eusebius, writing around 300 years afterwards and citing sources he does not name, says Pilate fell into misfortune under Caligula and took his own life. A tradition in Gaul puts his death at Vienne. A Swiss legend puts his body in a lake on the mountain that still carries his name. And the Ethiopian church went in the opposite direction entirely and made him a saint. Those are traditions. They are not records. The honest answer is that the Roman Empire lost track of the man who sentenced Jesus of Nazareth and never wrote down what became of him. We have his name in stone. We do not have his ending. Which brings us to the last 2. And with them, we do not even have that much. Everyone so far had a title. These 2 had a name and a job, and that is all. Barabbas appears in all 4 Gospels. which is rare. The four rarely agree on the details of anything. Mark calls him a man who had committed murder during an insurrection. Luke says the same. John uses a single word for him that means bandit, and which Josephus uses constantly for insurgents. And some of the earliest manuscripts of Matthew give his full name as Jesus Barabbas, which would mean that the crowd in that courtyard was choosing between two men named Jesus. The name itself carries the whole thing, Bar-Abba, son of the Father. He came out of a specific world. Rome annexed Judea in the year 6, and the first thing it did was run a census for taxation. A Galilean named Judas raised a revolt against it, on the argument that it was a sin against God to pay tribute to Caesar, because God alone was king. That revolt was crushed. The idea was not. For the next 60 years, Judea produced a continuous low-grade insurgency, armed groups in the hills, ambushes on roads, assassinations in crowds. Rome answered with mass crucifixions along the highways. Josephus records 2,000 at once in a single suppression. Every generation in Judea had seen a line of crosses along a road. So the crowd in that courtyard was not looking at a monster. Depending on who you asked, they were looking at a man who had done what the prophets seemed to demand, taken up a weapon against the empire occupying the land. Now, the release itself. There is no Roman law anywhere establishing an annual Passover pardon. That is the honest position, and most historians hold it. But there is a surviving document that shows the mechanism working exactly the way the Gospels describe it. It is a papyrus from Roman Egypt from around the year 85, recording a hearing before the governor Gaius Septimius Vegatus. The governor tells the accused man, "You deserve a flogging, but I give you to the crowds. I give you to the crowds." That is a Roman official in a Roman province on an ordinary administrative day releasing a prisoner as a concession to public opinion and saying so in those words. So an annual formalized amnesty is not documented. A Roman governor releasing a prisoner to calm a volatile crowd at a dangerous moment is completely documented. And Passover in Jerusalem was the single most dangerous week on the calendar. Whether Pilate did that every year or did it once, the maneuver fits everything we know about how he governed, and then Barabbas walks out. Scripture goes silent in the same sentence that the chains come off. Josephus never mentions him. No Roman list names him. No early Christian writer claims to know anything. He walks back into an occupied city, into a movement building toward the revolt that will burn the temple in the year 70. That is the last thing anyone can say about him with any confidence at all. The final man is the one who did the actual work. Roman crucifixion was carried out by a squad of 4 soldiers under a centurion. It was skilled labor. The men who did it often, and the execution site outside the city wall was in continuous use. Whoever drove the nails that Friday had almost certainly done it the week before, and would do it again the week after. Mark records that the centurion standing opposite him, seeing the way he died, said, "Truly this man was the Son of God." Matthew gives the same line. Luke changes it to, "Certainly this was a righteous man." None of them give his name. The name came later. By the 4th century he is called Longinus, from the Greek word for spear, in a text called the Gospel of Nicodemus, which fuses the centurion who spoke with the soldier who pierced his side. Later tradition gives him failing eyesight, healed by the blood, a conversion, a mission to Cappadocia, and a martyrdom. That is legend built on top of a gap, and the gap is the point. The Roman Empire kept meticulous records. It recorded grain shipments and troop rotations and tax registers and the names of officials who dedicated buildings. It did not record the name of the man who crucified Jesus of Nazareth. 6 men, 9 years. The prefect, recalled, ordered to Rome, and erased before he arrived. The high priest removed by that same official and found in a cave in 1990. The man behind the priesthood, no death recorded at all, and a house that ended in a street during the revolt. The tetrarch, stripped by an emperor and exiled to Gaul, with the wife who chose to go with him, and the prisoner and the soldier gone without a line. 2 names in stone, 4 in silence. Which one do you think history buried on purpose? Tell me below. I read everyone. The man I get asked about most is the prisoner. If you want the full story of Barabbas, the papyrus, the manuscript problem, and the Jerusalem he walked back into, it is right here. And there is a 7th man. He was in the room. He was on the council that voted. And afterwards he did something that should have cost him everything. He walked into the prefect's residence and asked Pontius Pilate for the body. Joseph of Arimathea. Next.